You're watching AM Agenda. I spoke earlier with the Group of Eight's Vicki Thomson about the planned changes to university funding. She says that this is not proper reform and has also urged the Senate crossbench to try to push for changes. I began by asking her whether it's fair enough the government is trying to push for a bit more of an even share of funding between the taxpayer and the people actually studying for the degrees.
Well, it's an argument that the government runs successfully, and does it pass the sniff test? I guess it might, but we are disappointed in the totality of what the government's announced. So we're disappointed that the government has announced cuts to universities at the same time as they've announced increases in student fees. And the cuts to universities come on top of successive cuts over many years of around $3.9 billion. So when you keep nipping away at the edges, the cumulative effect of these cuts is quite significant. So yes, it's easy to look at something in isolation and say, well, that looks fair and that sounds fair. But I think you have to look at it in the broader context. And if we just look at students for the minute, students are making a significant contribution to their degree. And in fact, in the OECD context, our students make a greater contribution to their education than other comparable OECD countries. And it does come at a time when housing affordability is an issue, the cost of living is an issue. So I think in isolation, as I said, it probably passes the sniff test, if you like, but if you look at it in totality, the bottom line is it's a hit to students.
Right, and what about pulling out one student as an example, the six-year medical degree? You know, in that case, you've got the government paying $137,000 and a student $75,000. Does that seem almost generous? I mean, it can be quite a lucrative career as well.
Can be a lucrative career, and our medical students who become our doctors and our specialists save our lives, and so they deserve to be have that lucrative career. Look, I think we have to kind of lift our gaze a bit from the specifics and look at what are the signals that this government is sending in relation to the university sector in Australia. And the universities that I represent, which are the research-intensive universities, we do the heavy lifting, $6 billion worth of research each year across our 8 universities. We do around 70% of the government-funded research. We have 385,000 students. We are making a significant contribution to the economy.
The government says that they put into a Deloitte study that says there's enough funding there for the courses, and this is certainly a much smaller cut than what was happening in 2014 originally.
Well, this budget is definitely a disaster averted, there's no question about that, but it's also an opportunity lost from our perspective. And we think, you know, here we are celebrating, and we're quite happy that research funding has not been cut. We're happy that the equity program, the higher education participation program, has not been cut. But we're in this position where we haven't received any additional funding. We accept that our sector has to make an effort to the national budget repair. We would argue very strongly that we have and we do over successive years. And we have a Prime Minister and a Minister and government who say universities are the engine rooms, and the Minister said this last night, the engine rooms of the national economy and the innovation economy.
All right.
We can't be the engine room if you continually cut our funding.
Have you done any work, studies, surveys on whether you think these changes could affect numbers at all? There's still no upfront payments. They're relatively small increases for students.
So Australia has a very generous loan system, and you're quite right, there's no upfront payment. We don't, to answer to your question, no, we haven't done the work yet, but we do remain a little concerned that you know, will this be a deterrent to some students who may be looking, or parents who are advising their students, who are looking at the points that I made earlier, the totality of the issues that a 24, 25-year-old who graduates comes out and may be wanting to buy a house, or, you know, living costs or whatever it might be. So I think looking at it in isolation is one thing, but we need to actually look at what the signals are that the government is sending in terms of the value it places on our universities.
Okay, well, what about your message to Labor and the crossbenchers when this hits the Senate?
Well, that'll be an interesting discussion. So what we would ask all politicians to look at, Labor and the crossbenchers and the government, is to look at the contribution that we make as a sector. We're a $22 billion sector. We're the 3rd largest export sector. At the same time yesterday that the Finance Minister was announcing or signalling company tax cuts, we were being cut.
But what's your blunt message? Block it? Change it?
No, I'm not prepared to say block it. I think we need to negotiate, and we need the crossbenchers to hold the government to account.
To change what?
Well,
if you could change this bill, if the crossbenchers were amenable, what you wanted to happen?
In a perfect world, we wouldn't want the universities to face the efficiency dividend of 2.5% in 2018 and another 2.5% in 2019. We would like to see research funded in a better way. We currently have this system, which is a distorted funding model. So what we have at the moment is our research is cross-subsidised by our international students. If research and the indirect costs of research were covered, we wouldn't have to rely on the international student income in the way that we do. So this is not a reform package, and I think that's an important element. The government is announcing this as a reform package. We would say this is a savings package.
But you know the government wants to save money, so when you say you'd oppose the efficiency dividend, is there some other way you would give the government a saving?
We've given the government savings. This is the point.
No more.
This is the point. What is the tipping point? We have successively given the government savings since 2011. So you look at a range of programs over the last 6-7 years have been cut, shaved here and there.
By both parties?
By both parties. There's no question about that. We are an easy target, and that concerns us. It seems that our political value is somewhat diminished, and yet on the one hand, that's diminished, whilst on the other hand, we're told we're the engine room to growth in the economy.
Because Labor said, oh, we made this efficiency dividend plan they didn't go through with, but we were funding, education still, but that's not what the higher education sector wants to hear, that money's still going on other education?
No, look, you have to look at the entire education budget. You can't... We're not arguing that we should be quarantined indefinitely from cuts over a successive period of years. What we are saying is we have done the lifting. This is not a sector which is now coming out in 2017 and arguing against a 2.5% efficiency dividend in isolation to the cuts that we've had over successive years. Okay. And I think that gets lost.
Can I just ask quickly on the efficiency dividend, will the uni soak that up? Will there be higher charges for students beyond what's quoted by the government?
So what you'll see, I think, from universities, and our universities would be busily working this through now, where that impact is, it's on the quality of the delivery of the service to our students. So you might see increased class sizes, for example. You might see changes in the way we go about doing our research.